The biggest wargaming board in YouTube history continues here at Zorpazorp as we dive into the first city block of Osgiliath, an amazing ruined, half-sunken city that becomes a major battleground in the War of the Ring between Gondor and Mordor. Here at the channel, we are currently working on an epic Siege of Gondor mega board, combining the locations of Minas Tirith, the Pelennor Fields, and Osgiliath into one continuous piece of wargaming scenery for a massive Lord of the Rings Warhammer campaign, and today we are finally revisiting the very roots of this project with the city of Osgiliath. Longtime viewers will know that this board was the very beginning of Zorpazorp itself. Our first ever video covered a build journey of over 7 years that culminated in a 100 square foot monstrosity, which after some careful consideration, I smashed to pieces just under a year ago. The old board was started when I was still a teenager and had many glaring inconsistencies and flaws that I just couldn't see past, so I decided to completely cannibalize it for parts and reforge the landscape into a super high quality, super modular gaming board that would form the final third of the Siege of Gondor mega board. The original structures were hand carved from foam core board, and even though they aren't as nice as work I do today, they still had a great look and a unified aesthetic, so once these were all salvaged, I set about designing a layout that could reuse these existing structures in a much better fashion. I settled on a series of fully built-in gaming boards that were completely rigid and incredibly detailed, but could be combined in many ways to get different layouts. The portions could be broken up into smaller 5x4s for tournament play, the boards could come all together to form one massive riverbank for the Siege of Gondor mega board, or they could even be flipped to face each other to create opposing riverbanks for a dedicated Osgiliath setup. In our most recent update on the project, we put down the foundation of our first city block, taking 2 of our tiles, a 2x4 and a 3x4, to make one 5x4 board, and built in some of our old structures, fixing them to the board with a sexy retaining wall and foundational detailing plan, making an epic network of streets and alleyways with some cobblestone rollers and modeling compound. It is so good to finally see this bad boy again. I love the layout of the streets, and now we get to finally take it to the next level and get this partially flooded city ready for gaming. Before we dive in, if you'd love the chance to win a copy of The Battle for Balin's Tomb, make sure you like this video, be subscribed to the channel, and comment down below which part of the whole Siege of Gondor mega board so far is your favorite. I'm really keen to see your responses. Unfortunately, our first task is to build a structural frame of timber to mount the board to. Sadly, the masonite has been sitting in my storage unit for over a year and has completely warped in places, so a timber brace screwed together and then mounted with a few fixings where possible and liquid nails is the way to go. This is actually an essential component anyway when making a huge resin water feature, as the baseboard must have a really high structural integrity to resist warping as the resin cures, and it also helps to have good surfaces for mounting edging to stop the resin from leaking, so I totally should have done this from the start anyway. But now it's painting time. Yes, painting before Rubble, and you'll see why a bit later on. Now, I originally intended to go absolutely hardcore on this paint job, bust out my airbrush and pick out every single one of the bricks like I used to do on the early Minas Tirith pieces to give them a subtly different toning, but the more I poured over the reference material, it's just not accurate. The city is just a massive slab of grey. So how do we paint that but still keep it interesting? Instead of varying the undertones, we're going to be varying the overtones. But first up, here's a word from today's sponsor. A time comes in every wargamer's life where they say, magnets, where do I find them? Well, look no further than the magnetbaron.com, your DIY super magnet home. I've been doing loads of magnetization lately for the staggering amount of Horus Heresy vehicles drowning my studio, and super strong magnets designed for wargaming are an absolute god emperor send. The magnetbaron.com have a huge range of wargaming magnets, including specific kits for notoriously difficult to magnetize models, magnetized movement trays, and even magnetized collapsible flight stands for that epic wargaming travel experience. I challenge you to find a better feeling in all of wargaming than the pure bliss of this moment. magnetic perfection. So to score some boss wargaming magnets for all your army needs, hit up themagnetbaron.com, link down in the description. And remember guys, support the sponsors that support me. It is killer for the channel, it helps so much. And Constantine from The Magnet Baron is a proper legend
from themagnetbaron.com.
So definitely go and show him some love. Alright guys, let's get back to the battle. So the primary color blocking is just a whole bunch of spray cans. Up first is an all-over coating on the entire board, both buildings and road, with Rust-Oleum dark grey. This is completely even coverage. At first I was a bit scared losing all the detail of the old paint scheme, but I'm rolling the dice here and saying goodbye, and it totally paid dividends. Now we're gonna do two zenithal passes, first with a light grey and then with a white over that dark grey. These passes are sprayed onto the buildings from directly above to create lighter tones on all of the parts of the buildings that would be exposed to a top light like the sun, and create shadows in all of those hidden recesses. The light grey I applied quite heavily so that it kind of became the primary toning of the buildings, and that dark grey underlayer is really quite minimal just in those recesses, and then the white layer was used very sparingly just to really accent highlights on those bright details. Top down, however, does not work on the roadways. Just do that on the buildings, otherwise you get a really flat, shapeless color on all of the flagstones. So instead, spray the highlights parallel to the road surface to hit the tops of all of the flagstones, and that leaves the grooves with the darker layers beneath. I ended up doing mostly gray highlights on the flagstones and very little with the white, which also helped create a kind of subtle toning difference between the roads and the buildings. Then, before the rattle cans go away, I created a foundational gradient for the river by putting down a layer of black and then adding in passes of dark grey and light grey working towards the riverbank. Essentially, to simulate depth, we want lighter colours near the shallow parts and darker parts at those depths. We'll do more to this in a moment with the airbrush, and then this will really come to life. We've got a nice color profile, but up next we need a big, sexy black wash, so I followed Jez's recipe from Black Magic Craft, and that's Jez's as in Jez, short for Jeremy, not Jazza. My broad Australian accent and propensity to nickname all my mates always creates a few conniptions in the comments section whenever I mention Jeremy. This was slapped down all over the board, which created some nice toning and brought down the highlights a little, but it was too uniform, and so it was time to break out the big guns. Yes, it's time for oils. Now I cannot honestly believe how long it took me to get into using oils and enamels and stuff that is just not acrylic paints. I get the fear factor guys, but if you think Nuln Oil is talent in a bottle, oils and enamels will blow your minds. I first mixed up a black wash by thinning some Winsor & Newton lamp black with some foam safe thinner, and then applied that heavily all over the board. Some sections it was an all over wash just like the acrylic black, especially in regions where I needed more definition like the retaining walls, but on the buildings I stippled it and dumped it on unevenly, let it run, creating stains and super patchy coverage that looks like grime and faded paintwork. I cannot stress enough how easy this was. It's a total walk in the park, mate. And already the buildings are getting so much character. And now we get to bring in the pièce de résistance. I mixed up a little brown wash, a little bit of 50-50 burnt sienna and burnt umber, and then applied that all over the place in a really thin pass to create layers and layers of grime and dirt. You can really go to town with this and have so much fun all around the bases of the buildings, staining the sides of the walls, streaks of dirty rainwater or refuse splotched into recesses where water would pool or dust would build up. A big shout out to my boy Eric from Eric's Hobby Workshop for teaching me this gem in the latest Tubatown Minas Tirith collab. So much fun and it looks so good. But up next, it's airbrush time, and the lads from Scale Modelers Supply here in Australia recently sent me up the Dragonair airbrush with a bunch of swag, and I have been loving it so far. I'm stoked to have an Aussie airbrush company here with such good gear. After a massive deep clean because past Lockie left the airbrush completely clogged with acrylic black lacquer, seriously, fuck that guy, it was time to start laying down our river tones. Now the Anduin River in the films was shot on a bunch of locations which I have of course kayaked, rafted and personally swum in, yes, even the freezing glacial melts of the Karawau, and as a result of those shooting locations influencing the color grade of the water in both the miniature plates and the wet set at Stone Street Studios where much of Osgiliath was filmed, the river has quite a blue-grey color palette. So first up, two blues from Vallejo Air, blue and blue-grey, grey, I started applying thin passes over the black to grey gradient. Our aim was to keep that rough change in brightness and simply tone it blue. I quickly abandoned the Vallejo Air Blue. It was too concentrated and bright and colourful. I needed that more muted colour, so I blended in some grey and then eventually just went with blue-grey completely, and I really fell in love with the colour that it created. And it was just so much fun, like applying different concentrations and really enhancing the dappled effect of a really variable depth for the river. Really enjoyable, and once you get airbrushes clean, they are so much fun to use. So we've got a pretty sweet set of tonalities, a nice grey blue for the river, some sweet greys and browns for our filthy stonework, but something is missing. Yes, it's time to make this board absolutely come to life with a whole load of rubble. We'll be using the Geek Gaming Scenics base ready range, of course, as always, which is available from my shop, Zorpazorp.com, link down in the description. And first we're going to mix up a nice little blend of grimdark city rubble and coarse rubble or plain city rubble to get a really nice neutral grey that matches our stonework colour, and then we are going to bloody dump it everywhere. First we need to grab some fast drying basing glue and slather that all over the board, then ideally let that dry for about 15 minutes till the edges go glossy and tacky, and then we just pile on our rubble. You want to put down the big aggregate sizes first and then a smaller grain size. This will allow the rubble to get a good purchase on all of that foundation. I did this all over the board, up against the walls, all around the river collapsing sections that were heavily damaged, especially where I wanted to cover joins on the tilting tiles to hide the lack of floor cracks that I never sculpted. As I blended the various mixes, I ended up getting a few regions where I had more or less grimdark city rubble, which darkens or lightens the color, and that worked really well to give some sections a little bit of a scorched ground type of feeling. Once you're happy with all of that, give it an hour or so to really grab, and then it's time to start sealing it. Now, for a rubble density which is this intense, there is a pretty serious process to get a long-lasting and durable game board. First, we want to spray or pipette a bunch of isopropyl alcohol and then absolutely soak it in Geek Gaming Matte Scenic Sealant. Do this section by section so that the alcohol hasn't evaporated before the sealant goes down. The ISO is absolutely crucial as it creates a capillary action that carries the sealant molecules deep down into the aggregate blend by breaking the surface tension and allowing it to penetrate deep into the rubble. Then give that board about 12 hours to dry and then do it again. And again and again. Seriously, 3 or 4 big soakings is perfect for a massive amount of super dense rubble, and then you will have a bloody rock solid gaming surface that looks amazing and will survive your gameplay. Now this board isn't done, and we've got some epic stages left. There's some detail missing, some city life, barrels, crates, supplies, damaged furniture, and then of course there's an absolutely massive resin pour. This entire lower portion of the city is going to be ankle deep in water, which means the deepest part will be about 1 inch in draft. That is a serious amount of resin, but that's not going down today. I ran out of time this week, and this beast is needed for a bloody awesome project soon, and it looks pretty great as it is. If you're loving the 3D printed Osgiliath rafts, you can grab the STL file from my online store, link down below. It's a great way to support the channel as well, and they're so epic for amphibious assaults. A huge shout out to my Patreons. Look at these amazing folks. Join them if you dare. There are some sweet perks, and check out the links below down in the description for Patreon, my online shop, and absolutely get keen. The Siege of Gondor board is well on its way now, folks. Alright, I'll see you in the next one.